You're listening to ABA On Call, hosted by myself, Rick Kubina, and Doug Kostewicz. This is your front row seat to the future of behavior analysis. Join us for fresh ideas, practical strategies, and bold conversations designed to inspire action. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to ABA On Call. Doug, how are you today?
I'm doing very well. How are you, good sir?
I cannot complain. And
Good.
every time we get together, I really enjoy this time because behavior analysis, I think for many people, not everyone, it's just for me a way of life. And I won't speak for you, but when I first was an undergrad and, I learned about it and then I learned more about my master's degree, then I practiced and I got Ph.D. I've been researching, doing all these things. I just see this as my viewpoint to the world.
I don't remember not being a behavior analyst, so that just echoes the same thing. It's just the way I see things.
Yeah. And if others can relate to that, there are certain concepts and parts of behavior analysis that if you buy into this science and what implications it has for the philosophy, there's certain things that you would concede. And one of those, which we've done a podcast before, so this is part 2, is free will, the notion of free will.
Mm-hmm.
And what behavior analysis suggests through data is that we do not have free will.
Nope.
Is that your take on it?
That would be my take on it, sir. So
What
it's not. Go ahead.
No, you go.
I was just going to say and I think the biggest point is that's okay, right? You just said it. We've been doing behavior analysis for so long. That's just comes with things, but that obviously, if you've interacted with people outside of our discipline, is not a shared consensus that there are people that definitely believe in free will. And I think the article that you came across is pretty cool because this is someone outside of behavior analysis that kind of is a scientist as well and looks at it that way.
Yeah. So we're going to get into this article, but I wanted to make another comment, and that is forget other people outside of our discipline, which that is an issue, just the world at large. Like there's a lot of people that are not familiar with psychology or other disciplines that talk about this. And when you talk to many people and you look at the institutions that, for example, the criminal justice system, it hinges on the fact that people have free will. And we're using this term free will, and we should define it. But when we talk about free will, essentially that means that as humans, we can make any choice of our own volition, and the decisions are based on what we are the causal agents that are making our behavior happen. And forget external forces, physical laws, these other things that would impinge on what we're doing. Ultimately, if you have free will, you are a causal agent. And if you do something, and this is again going to the criminal justice system, if you do something and it is against the law, you should be punished because you chose to do that. So this is what we mean by free will.
Right. So you do this in face of everything else. You can decide, you can choose, you can make whatever good, bad, whatever value decision, regardless of what is going on around you. That is free will.
Yeah. And of course, this also has a lot of implications for religion, for just many different parts of our daily life. And as you were saying earlier, we're reviewing just an article that talks about a book by Robert Sapolsky. And for those of you who don't know Robert Sapolsky, he is a very famous neurologist, neurologist, no, that's the wrong word. Neuroscientist, and maybe neurologist. I think neuroscience is the better word. And he's written some books. And of course, when his first book came out called Behave, this courted a lot of controversy because he's talking about moral and ethics. And he's done a lot of work in working with primates. And he used his teachings to write this book. And now he has a second book out, which is called Determined. And this book, Determined, which that's the short title, it has a longer title, is also getting at what is his ultimate conclusion. We don't have free will. And he approaches this a little bit differently than we do, which we'll talk about later. But he looks at this through the cognitive lens. But this nice little, and we'll put this in the show notes so you can all read this. This nice little article just gets into so many incredible points about free will, and it's worth us talking about it again.
Yep. So one of the things that he illustrates early is that he came to this conclusion very slowly. He didn't want to, I don't want to say believe or follow this, but he came to this through a lens that he specifically says, as he expanded out and looked at things from a variety of disciplines, it came to the conclusion that there is no free will. It's very easy for researchers, scientists, people, when you tighten your lens, to believe that whatever isn't explained by your area, then I can decide how I want, or I can make whatever decisions. So he's looking at it as we do things, and we'll talk about this in relation to behavior analysis. We do things that may look very different under the same situation, but we're individuals, and we are determined by what's going on for us based on everything that we've done in our life. So it's very cool to read someone outside of behavior analysis looking at that and kind of discovering this, although he's very nervous about discovering this, but it does, kind of discovering this and putting this out there.
Yeah. He has evidence that led him. This isn't like, oh, hey, he woke up one day and said, this article quotes him and he says, look, we need to just do away with the myth of free will if we want to have a more just society. I mean, that's a powerful statement, but how he got there is he did a lot of work with primates where he would study them. He also looks at neurological forces that happen to us. And when you look at like the brain and how behavior is occurring, if you look very closely, he's saying, you know what? There's no room in any of this to suggest that, oh yeah, you have free will. And he brings up a lot of good examples, which we'll talk about the implications in our next segment, but some of these examples are great. Starting off with talking about epilepsy. And if you have epilepsy, we can understand that your behavior is going to be impacted because you have this physical thing. And that's a determined cause. And if you agree that there are causes that are determining your behavior, it's really hard for you to say, okay, well, where does it stop? Like, nope. Yeah, those things impact my behavior, but all of a sudden, we're free to, it stops here. Because why?
Yeah. So he uses, well, no, that's an implication. I don't want to jump ahead. There's the idea that there's a demarcation line. Who makes that line? Who makes the line between what is now free will and what was determined? Because as they said in the article, that line used to be further. It used to be epilepsy was over here. It was controlled by demons. It was controlled by, and that wasn't so long ago. But as
Right.
we've increased our science, increased our observations, our understanding, or as Skinner would talk about, understanding, the private events that are attainable just to the individual, you're still seeing that, still determined. It's all, but now the line just shifts a little bit more. And we're comfortable with that line shifting further, and that there is even a line. And
Yeah.
so yeah, he's saying there's not really a line.
He talked about oxytocin, the so-called love hormone. And I remember a long time ago reading a study that looked at moms that had low levels of oxytocin and high levels and how they interacted with their kids. And guess what? Those that had low weren't hugging their kids as much, weren't showing as much love. And those with typical levels and higher did that. So when you look at this data very objectively, you're like, okay, does that mom really not love her child and she's a bad person, blah, blah, blah? Or can that behavior be determined through some of these processes? And guess what? It can be determined, and we keep seeing more and more of this. Well, I tell you, Doug, this is a great article. We need to talk more about it, but this brings us to our end of this first segment. And the first secret word is free.
So, Rick, now the implications of this are tenfold, right?
Yeah.
It's enormous. So, and you already mentioned it earlier, it's mentioned in here, but we're getting to this notion of punishment by society. The individual is now responsible for their own behavior, right? You're choosing. All of that language begins to become very slippery if we take away this notion of free will and now look at it was determined given their history, given the contingencies of reinforcement, to use our language,
Right.
that it puts things in a different light. And it gets really hard to, I mean, I'll be honest with you, it gets hard to sit back and say, you know what? The person who had an is in the article, person has an epileptic seizure and has an accident, kill someone, versus someone who drank too much, has an accident, kill someone. They're both determined.
Yeah. And that's unsettling.
Yeah.
There are so many behaviors that we deal with every single day. And if you believe that we don't have free will, it very much changes how you view just what's happening. Like I remember very early on when my very first job as a behavior analyst, I had this, and this is the first time I experienced like it's like a mini riot where all these kids were in this area, and I was a behavior analyst. I had to come in there. Some kid, little Mikey P, jumps on my back, bites me. And let me tell you, if you've never experienced someone biting your back and like you can't get that person, it is the most painful, terrifying event because you're like, oh, it was just really uh a traumatic experience. I had this big chunk almost in my back that felt like it was coming out. And when that happens and you look at the person afterwards, very much like in the moment, you're just trying to do everything to get that person off you. But afterwards, I wasn't like, you know what? I'm going to get you. You messed me up. I'm going to do this thing to you to get you back. And I understood that he had a brain injury. He was a younger child. I could understand all the forces, the circumstances in his life that brought him to where he is. And I could completely accept it. And, that story now just resonates with me when I think about how I didn't get angry. I didn't hold a grudge, and I just went on with life. And that's what he's talking about earlier. If we want a just society, we have to look at things very differently.
Right. And one thing that we forgot to mention, and I want to remind everyone, when we talk about determined, that's not the same as fated. right?
Yes.
And so this notion that there's this false division, if we don't have free will, we're fated to do something. That is not the case at all. We can, given our history, work with someone to change their behavior, and they're not fated to become whatever in their life. We can still help them. We can help ourselves arrange those contingencies around us. But the notion is, when you've got someone and they're doing something, that was what they were supposed to do. And it is hard. I mean, I've been hit as well. And, you know, I'm human. There's counter control. There's, my
Yes.
response to aversive situations. But my history with behavior analysis, I came very similar to the situations that you come into. It was like, it was much easier later on to step back out of the situation and say, what else could they have done? What if I don't have the words to communicate? If I don't have the history of communicating, I'm going to do that. And again, where does that line stop? Do we say, oh, just a child with special needs in a self-contained classroom? That's okay. But that one in general education, he should have known better. No, it's the same. It's the same thing. And a lot of teachers out there do, people who work with kids do have that feeling. But once they're older, oh, you're not a kid anymore. It's like these arbitrary lines come into play. And now it's no longer understanding that they really couldn't have done anything else to, you should know better. You're older, you're mature, you're an adult. We do have a society that pushes back on the individual, because then we don't need to look at how the society is setting the stage for things. It's easier to punish the individual than it is to re-examine how we interact.
Yeah. You made two big points there, and I want to talk about both of them more. I want to go back to your first point, which is, like, in this article, of course, in the media, they always have to present two sides, and the other side that they presented was another neuroscientist. And if you remember, he wrote some book on free will, so obviously they're going to pick that. And let me see if I can find the quote.
It's dangerous to say we don't have free will.
Yeah. He says, even if the range of potential outcomes is limited, there's still too much variability in the neurons to think our behavior is predetermined. Guess what? No one's saying our behavior is predetermined. That is a completely different concept.
Yep.
Predetermined means you're going to engage in these behaviors. So predetermined means, you and I are we were fated to do this podcast.
Right. And that is a no-go.
Exactly. And producer Karen, shout out to her. She knows we have a lot of issues getting together and making things happen. If that's the case, there's we have some evidence against that predetermination. And we behave as behaviorists or behavior analysts, or I'm behaviorists, I'll use both of those terms here. We understand that we are all the locus of our biology in the contingencies. It's not just the contingencies. We're biological creatures. So we have all these things going on, and you put all these things together, the contextual events, the motivating operation. I mean, it's just this rich array of the variables that happen, and these things come together, but it doesn't mean that there aren't all of these factors influencing us into making what things are most probable. And I think you may have appreciated this, but in this article, they talk about, or he talks about, how he'll have graduate students. Like, I've taught seminars where we've talked about free will, and he'll talk about graduate students just having a real hard time coming to grips with this. And some of the graduate students saying, like, oh, well, I'm going to pick up this pen. This shows that I have free will. Not so fast.
No.
Just because you can do things and you think you're doing things doesn't mean you have free will. I mean, how would you respond to that? What would the counter narrative be to someone coming in your office saying, oh, well, we don't have free will. I can do this. I'm shaking my hands for those of you who,
The only reason you did that is because we're having a conversation about free will. You wouldn't have done that had you not come in and had the conversation. And what you did was based on your learning history, but you were determined to do it under those environmental conditions. It's easy to say that. It's hard to take that and leap it towards the next stage. So yeah, when you have someone to come and say, well, I was going to stick out my tongue at you. Okay. Well, if you've never learned how to stick out your tongue, you wouldn't, right? You
that's
learned
right.
how. You had a history with, people responding to your stick out your tongue. And this situation set the occasion for a tongue sticking out situation. And okay. So, but you didn't, that wasn't free. You don't decide outside of the environmental context. We are too linked to the boat, but don't feel, and this is probably, and I'll repeat it again, don't feel that you were born X number of years ago and fated to stick your tongue out at me in that moment,
Right.
21 years later. That's where there is not a either or situation. Actually, it's neither of those. It's
Yeah.
simply what happened. And that is, it was really cool because in the article, he talks about individuals seeing some video about helping. One person could go off the Peace Corps, one person could go be a scientist, and the other 32 could be like, why is it another Marvel movie? I mean, it's just,
Right.
it's how you interact, but they weren't fated to do it. It wasn't predetermined that they were going to do it, but it was determined on what they did.
Yeah. And thinking back to your defense of why, and this works with the example. If you have people that have strong counter control and act one way versus other people that come into your office that are fearful of professors and will never say anything, you can explain exactly why those people are doing it. It just so happens that because we're along for the ride and we're able to have this verbal behavior and be like, oh yeah, well, I did it. No, just because you
It,
feel something doesn't prove, your feelings don't prove and supersede all of these other things, which you have no idea of what's happening.
yeah.
Well,
Well, that brings us,
no, we're fighting
I
over the
was,
secret word. Look at
yeah, this
that.
brings us to our second secret word, and that secret word is Willie.
Going somewhere.
Willy.
We're going
Willie.
somewhere with these secret words.
Yep.
All right, Doug, let's talk about our last segment. And let's see. That is what this article. I hope you all read this, and maybe it'll even encourage you to read some of this guy's books. But we are behavior analysts, and we all have a science, and it is a very powerful science. What does it contribute? What does it add? How does it help us think about this differently from Sapolsky, who is a neuroscientist and came to this conclusion? But we've come to this conclusion also, and we might have arrived from different places, and we agree at the end output. But this science that we've all studied and looked at and engaged with, it has its own ways of helping us understand and suggest that free will. And let me say this too before I end that sentence. You can't prove this stuff. You can look at probabilities and say, based on this evidence, I feel pretty strongly that this is what's true, but you can never 100% prove this. And that's not what we're doing. But if I'm a betting person, which I am, I'm going to bet that there's a great likelihood that we do not have free will.
So yeah, you got two things going on there. I had a response to the first one, and then then you went off another direction. So I'm going to go back to the first one because I think that what behavior analysis, because Sapolsky, I get the sense that he's searching, like he came to this and he's getting at all the terminology of behavior analysis without actually using behavior analysis. I think one thing that Skinner and behavior analysis sense has, we've been very parsimonious in how we explain the different environmental functions. And I think understanding that would really help him to further solidify his notion that there is no free will, that things are determined. But the way we group things into discriminative stimuli, establishing operations, the role of contingencies, looking at concurrent schedules, understanding the science of behavior would actually go a long way towards cementing what he's already looking at. So when you talked about, what we've done about free will in our discussion, it he could actually expand on it and not feel nearly as nervous and worried that he came to this conclusion based on looking at different things, because he talks about it's easy. I mean, as you and I have lived as a behavior analyst for many years, we can easily translate all the factors that he talks about into a, I know it's just the three-term contingency is just a graphic organizer that's more complex than that, but we can quickly see all the different factors on behavior. And when you get to the notion of determinism, it's looking at those factors. So that's what I see behavior analysis bringing to this conversation. While we've hit on the absence of free will much earlier than Sapolsky, he doesn't see that as he's expanded his view of different sciences. So that was the first thing. And I totally forgot what the second one is. So you go ahead and take some.
When it comes to it, bring it back up. But, Skinner, being just such a genius, he gave us these three levels of selection. Phylogeny, these would be the things that are happening at the level of genes, so phylogenetic in biology. And I think Sapolsky probably observed a lot of the phylogenetic selection when he's working with animals. But that's something that we've seen. People have done studies on that. And then there's ontogeny, which is what you were talking about. And that gets more at what happens in our life and what are the three-term contingency, the four-term contingency, understanding selection at that level. And then there's cultural selection. We have that's, I think most of us are firmly rooted in that middle level of selection, which is selection by consequences within the ontological view. Whereas, culture, people talk about that, but there's a lot more that we can do there. And of course, the phylogeny, there's a lot more we can do there. But if you bring all of these things together, there's a pretty clear picture that, starting off looking at animals all the way up to humans, we can see that there are many, many reasons that we can explain behavior. We have this beautiful descriptive science. That's how we started off. We looked at observing what happens when you put these tightly controlled studies. And because we had this great science, we are able to not only predict, but control behavior. And we have so many of those studies that if you look at that evidence, how do you argue against it? You can just dismiss it.
Yeah. And you brought up something, and I was just thinking about this. You look at society, society wants there to be free will, because then we can say we don't have to fix certain people because they're going to do whatever they're going to do. We don't have to change anything. Whereas if you look at most of the educational system, Why would you teach anybody anything if they have free will? Because they're going to do what they're going to do regardless. We're not going to intervene. So we take a opposite route that we can help change behavior, that we can. So if you look at certain aspects of society want to have it, and behavior analysis has come in a lot in education, a lot with individuals with special needs or diverse needs, that there's not free will because we can arrange those contingencies to change, not control, but, that's a different kind of control, but change behavior to make it better for them. Otherwise, why do we do what we do?
I won't say that this is a recent phenomenon because it's been instilled in our roots as behavior analysts, but it's this notion of compassionate care. We have been compassionate and tried to exude compassion from, the moment we jumped from the laboratory to working with people. That compassion has been there. And if you understand that, okay, this person, if we understand fundamentally that this concept of free will, it doesn't help us. In fact, like you said, it can send us down this dark path of blaming people, of not helping people, of just saying, oh, you know what, go pick yourself up by your bootstraps or whatever. As a society, at the level of the culture, we need to understand and come together as a species to make this a better society. I'm not saying I have those answers. Skinner wrote, you and I reviewed Walden 2, and that was Skinner's novelistic way of saying this was what could be. But what would it really look like? I don't know. But I feel as a society, and this is how this article ends, that we're talking about, if we think about machines, you don't hate a machine if it fails, but yet we want the machines of humans to succeed. And the way we do that is by changing culture and also by enacting different laws, rules, and so on that would be more compassionate and would be in line with actually helping people behave in a way that's more productive for them, their families, society, and so on.
I think that brings us to the final word. And that final word is two, TWO.
It's not TOO, it's TWO.
Right.
Okay. I like it. Doug, as always, it is just a great time talking about behavior analysis with you. And this notion of free will is something, it's the second time. We could have a third, fourth, and fifth, and just keep talking about different things about this. But the science of behavior analysis is strong, it's compassionate, it's forward thinking. And with that, if everyone who is our audience members, if I could see you right now, I'd give you a high five, handshake, fist bump, or a hug, because we really appreciate you all out there. And we appreciate you coming to each one of our podcasts and listening to us and giving us feedback. We really like that feedback, and it helps shape up our shows. So keep on doing that. And if you have any other questions, just reach out to us. So with that, thank you all for joining us on ABA On Call. Thank you for being part of ABA On Call. Want to grab your CEU? Just click the link in the instructions, complete the quiz, enter the secret words, and pay the fee to download your certificate. You've done the work, claim the credit. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next episode.